Welcome to the Philip Wiley Show. Take a look behind the curtain of professional hacking and hear compelling discussions with guests from diverse backgrounds who share a common curiosity and passion for challenges and their job. And now, here's your host, offensive security professional, educator, mentor, and author, Philip Wiley.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Philip Wiley Show. Today I'm excited to be joined by CEO and co-founder of Horizon 3, Snehal Antani. So he's got a really interesting background, a lot of corporate America background, but it was a kind of interesting that we'll get into his details about how he worked in JSOC for a while and then went on to form Horizon 3, which has a really amazing product, Node Zero. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Phil. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's great to be here. So it's great to have you on. I mean, it's so very cool story, just kind of seeing, because just to kind of share with the listeners, this is actually, I actually worked for Snehal at Horizon 3. And whenever I got laid off at the end of February, Snehal had reached out to me about an opportunity there. And just to kind of show what kind of company and the product they had, I didn't realize that pen testing could be automated that much. So I only interviewed with like 2 or 3 other companies. And once I interviewed at Horizon 3, it's like I called off all the rest of the interviews. I thought I'm going to see this through a offer or a rejection, and then I'll move on from there because this was too good an opportunity to pass up.
No, I remember hearing about or catching wind of your change in employment. And we didn't have a position at Horizon 3, but it was one of those opportunistically when you find an expert that is well respected, that has no ego, that is a genuine learn-it-all. And the opportunity to bring somebody like that in, we'll find a spot. And with the bet that that person is going to elevate all of our performances. And sure enough, Phil, you join the company within 30 days. There's an impact, not just from your knowledge and background, but honestly, your positivity and your conviction to build the community and encourage the community to get better. Not only within Horizon 3, but across the entire community. And so thanks for making us better on a daily basis.
Yeah, it's great to be here, and it's great to be somewhere where people understand what you do. Because there's been so many times I've worked places where, I got recruited by someone on the marketing side, but, the salespeople or CEO didn't understand how to leverage that. So it's good to be somewhere that does know how to leverage those type of skills.
Well, not to digress, but there was an interesting article I read around the difference between SpaceX and Boeing. And SpaceX, politics aside for a moment, but SpaceX being led by an engineer and product person at heart versus some of these other larger Fortune 500 companies, mostly being led by spreadsheet type leadership. And as you're a spreadsheet leader, you tend to be disconnected from the end customer. You tend to be disconnected from the core product itself. Everything is about numbers and efficiency. And I think a key characteristic of iconic technology companies is that there is an obsession with the product and the technology that starts at the very top and permeates throughout every aspect of the company. And I think that looking at my time at, say, IBM or GE, there were certainly pockets of CEOs at IBM that were spreadsheet minded. If you look at Gerstner and Paul Masano, and I got to observe Ginny Rometty as well. Very brilliant business people. But if you look at the new CEO, Arvind, he's a product guy at heart. And you start to see a fundamental difference between having a product CEO permeate all the way through. And so I think at Horizon 3, we pride ourselves on being a technical company. I am obsessed with the product. I live, breathe, eat, sleep it on a daily basis. And I see the kind of people that really thrive at the company follow suit with that same level of obsession. And I think that's partially what makes the place special.
Yeah. So one of the things I have to say too, that I really commend you on, because this does, even when you take people that have you say, some people are technical and some people more business, but you take some people that are too tied or too close to the product to really listen to the people, that work for them, people either design the product or marketing the product, selling the product. When you have a leader that doesn't listen, that really kind of impacts the company. But I think that's really great that you listen to people, you trust the people in the company to do things and not just have to do it your way. And I've seen that kind of hurt companies that follow the other method.
Yeah, it's actually episodic to some degree. So I'll give you examples of both, and I'll just use myself as the example and lessons that I learned. So in a bull market, everything's going well. Revenue's coming in. You don't need to raise venture capital. Pipelines being built. The board's thrilled. The people are excited. Trusting and empowering the entire force to do their job works really, really well. When something suddenly changes, so for example, in April of 2022, the markets almost overnight flipped from being a bull market to a bear market. And almost overnight, we had to flip from being growth minded, which is hiring salespeople at all costs and drive revenue, no matter how inefficient you were, to being as efficient as possible and extending runway for as long as you could, because venture capitalists were no longer making investments. And the sooner you recognize that flip and the more aggressive you are at flipping from growth to efficiency, the more likely you are to survive as a company. And in those moments, we at Splunk, we should talk about being a wartime CEO or a wartime executive team. In those moments, you've got to flip and make really hard, but very fair decisions in order to ensure the company traverses or makes it through those kinds of tough periods. I think we saw a number of companies not recognize that transition or that market change fast enough. And then they didn't extend their runway effectively. And now a lot of them, I think, are struggling, especially cybersecurity companies. And to be honest with you, especially BAS, pen testing, that category of company. And so I think that being not just a CEO, but as an executive leadership team and a senior leadership team, knowing how to read the tea leaves as best as you can and flipping from trust and empower to down, like wartime, down and in, make hard decisions quickly. It's that balance that I think makes and breaks companies that cross that Silicon Valley of death and those that struggle.
So before we get too far along in the conversation, if you wouldn't mind sharing your hacker origin story, kind of where you started out in your career up until where you're at now.
Yeah. So I'll go even earlier than that, which is my tech story to begin with. So my dad is an electrical engineer. He immigrated to this country in the late 60s. And when I was about 6 years old, my dad would go on these business trips and he'd come back with toys that he had purchased, a toy robot, for instance. And for those that grew up in the 80s, there were these Toby robots, which were really cool. In fact, a listener once sent me a robot later. But my dad would actually take these robots, he would unscrew the back and he would somehow sabotage the robot in some way. He'd give me the toy with the batteries, I'd flip it on and nothing would work. And I was only 6 years old. And he's like, well, look, I don't know what's wrong with the toy, son, but here's a soldering iron, a multimeter, and a screwdriver. Maybe you can figure out what's wrong. And so my dad would, I'd sit in the corner of the family room and my dad would teach me to unscrew the robot, take it apart, use the multimeter to figure out one, are the batteries good? And then two, did current get from point A to point B? If so, then the problem's on the other side of the board. Did it get from B to C? No, that means that's probably where the problem is. And then he taught me to methodically debug hardware. And then sure enough, I would see the resistor that he clipped. And then I would use a soldering iron, redo the connection, and then the robot would turn on. And of course, I would get excited, drop the soldering iron, burn a hole in the carpet while I'm showing my mom and my little brother just how cool this thing was. And I figured out how to fix it. And so my tech origin story generally started from when I was very, very young because of my dad's obsession and passion for technology and how he was able to get me curious and interested in tech at a very young age. And then from there, it was getting exposed to bulletin board services, finding the Anarchist Cookbook, finding various hacker community tools, getting into punting people off of AOL and chat room phishing. And then my dad pretty quickly figured out that I was somehow getting online despite being grounded. It's because I had harvested a bunch of AOL credentials through a variety of techniques. I think I was 9 or 10 years old. And he had that fear of God conversation with me of, you will not go down this path, you will get in trouble. And so I flipped from this hacker obsessed kind of hacker curious world, reading 2600 every week, every quarter and so on, to becoming a programmer, more traditional software engineer, software designer type background. And that's where I went to undergrad at Purdue in computer science, started my career at IBM, and kind of grew up in the traditional software engineer turned blue team turned tech executive path, but always had this inclination and interest towards the offensive side of the house just from my curiosity when I was a kid. So I always paid attention to it, but I always had my dad's voice in the back of my head saying, don't do it. Don't go down that path. And finally I was able to get down that path safely by starting Horizon 3.
Very cool. So one of the things I find interesting is one of the things you did mention in your story is how you kind of worked in corporate America and then you pivoted over to JSOC. So could you kind of share what your thinking was there?
Yeah, I left IBM in 2012 to become a CIO at GE Capital. It was an amazing experience working at GE Capital in terms of just learning how to lead large teams and use tech to create a competitive advantage in banking. And then I left to be the CTO at Splunk. So moved to the West Coast with my wife and my then six-week-old child. And I was working at Splunk and got to learn how to grow and scale a pretty iconic and awesome company. At the end of 2017, I did what all of us aspire to do, which was take a 99% pay cut, leave industry altogether. And I had the opportunity to go serve within the U.S. Special Operations community. And it was an amazing experience because, for one, I was lucky enough to have made enough money to not worry about the bills, but not enough to be a typical pretentious Silicon Valley, guy in skinny jeans flying in private jets or something. But I had made enough to be comfortable, and I wanted to work on a problem that truly mattered. And I remember there were these two periods of helplessness that I had felt in my life. The first one was after 9/11. I was 21 years old when that happened. And I remember this feeling of helplessness and wanting to do something about it. But I couldn't find an obvious path where I could leverage my skills to make a difference. And then while that passion, the urgency to do something tapered off, the passion to want to work on problems that mattered was always there. And then in 2016, I remember watching the rise of ISIS and what happened to the Yazidis and other kinds of atrocities. And I got that feeling back again of, hey, I think I have skills that could make a difference. I want to find a way to have a force multiplier effect on a problem that matters, which was kind of that problem set. And so just through reputation and network, I ended up on the radar of the special operations community, and they invited me out for an offsite, and they were talking about the role of off-the-shelf drones being used by ISIS fighters to cause havoc on civilians. And the conversation was essentially, hey, look, we need to become a tech company. We need to run a pretty interesting digital transformation, if you will. Why don't you come join us and help be a catalyst for transforming aspects of the command? And, this is one of the most legendary and storied units and organizations in the world. And so for me, I viewed it as an opportunity to earn a PhD in leadership, working alongside these special operations folks that what makes them special is not that they can run far, shoot well, or swim fast. It's that they are learn-it-alls that can solve any problem as a team under pressure. And just the chance to be in the room, be next to, or just listening in on the way that these folks thought, the way they carry themselves, their ethics, their conviction, their demand for excellence was a tremendous opportunity for me to learn personally. And I was thankful to have that chance. And I joined early 2018 and spent about 4 years, 3.5, 4 years in the command. And then when I left, I started Horizon 3 with Tony, who was my deputy CTO at JSOC.
Very cool. So yeah, it's kind of interesting to take the pay cut to go do that. You don't see many people these days at that stage in their career that's going to take a step back and do something to help their country and try to help a cause like that. So it's very commendable. So it's very interesting too that, a lot of the folks that you worked with there end up coming over to Horizon 3. So did you really take from that experience to use that to build the culture at Horizon 3?
I did. So I think a big thing, sorry for the beat here. I think the big thing about the company and the people. So I had this rule when Tony and I first started Horizon 3, we had a very clear rule, which was we are not going to poach people from the command or from the military. And the reason why is their mission is unquestionable. The problems they've got to go solve the no-fail aspect of what they've got to go do is not something you want to mess with in any way. And talent is why that organization is as special as it is. And so our rule was we are not going to poach people from the command. However, if people are already committed to retiring, so they hit their 20 years in the military, they've committed to retiring, we will hopefully guide or steer them into Horizon 3, assuming they've got the appropriate skills. And so as Tony and I started to build out Horizon 3, we first, the early team, about 5 of the 8 people, served within the special operations community at some point in their career. You know, Zach Hanley was in special operations as a cyber operator. Travis Falgren was a cyber protection team person, so on and so forth. So we looked at people that had already retired, that served in that unit, or had already committed to retiring. And our hope was that we could convince them to join Horizon 3 because they brought very unique, very exquisite expertise to the table. And they also had the right culture, the right mindset. There's a lot of trust because we'd all come from that same world. And so that really underpinned the early part of the company. And even to this day, I think a third of the company is former special operations type folks, and 2/3 are nerds and skinny jeans that know how to build, ship, and sell software. And so bringing those two worlds together has been quite an experience from a cultural standpoint.
Yeah, one of the things I think that's unique too, whenever you look at Horizon 3 compared to some other companies, you know, you take some companies that are more offensive security oriented, you know, maybe they're a consulting company and they come up with a product and then they later on decide to turn into a product. But then I think what's fascinating here is the balance you have of people that are software developers, offensive security practitioners, and, you know, people that know how to automate infrastructure and all that to build out this tool is kind of unique, because you see a lot of other companies that are really just software companies. They're really not security companies. You see a lot of products out there offered that maybe people had a military background, but they haven't really worked in cybersecurity, you know, no idea of how the defensive side works, and they're building products. Whereas, you know, some of those organizations too, that, you know, they had very few people that could speak on the subject at conferences, but, you know, they had all these people that were building the products. So it's really interesting, I think, in a smart approach to have people that understand the cybersecurity side as well as developing a product.
Yeah, it's something that I noticed during my time at Splunk. Actually, Naveen Sankovali, who we just promoted to be our first distinguished engineer, had recognized this during his time, I think, at RSA. I think that was a company he was at when he recognized this, which is, my time at Splunk, he had a whole bunch of folks building defensive security products. But when I asked questions and pressed them a bit, they didn't really have knowledge of how attacks worked. They were software engineers and they could take a spec and build cool tech and, you know, drop a particular detection engineering string in there or whatever, or rule. But they weren't practitioners. So they had a hard time connecting with the end user and what that end user had to go through to do his or her job. And Naveen had recognized something similar. He said, I was building, this is Naveen, I was building defensive products, but I didn't really know what the attackers were doing. And so I was limited. And so Naveen went off as a software engineer, software architect, got an OSCP on his own, purely to learn and understand the attacker's perspective so he could become a better defensive software engineer. And so that mindset, I think, very much underpins the engineering team. Noah King, who was a front-end developer, passed his OSCP on his first try. Once again, having no kind of background in the offensive pen testing world outside of becoming a software engineer at Horizon 3. And there are a number of other folks that basically have been practitioners and have held the jobs and positions of the people using our product. So as a result, there's a high degree of empathy and understanding between how we build and design our capabilities and how the end users survive on a daily basis. Even for me, having been in the CIO seat, I have a high degree of empathy towards the end executive user of our results, which is why I'm not only very product obsessed, but I still, much to the chagrin of some engineering members of my team, still get involved in design because I'll wear the, hey, when I was a CIO, this is what I would have expected to see. And it's really cool to have lots of folks with that ability to put the hat of the end user on as we're going off and building the tech. The last thing I'll say, and it's a long answer, is on the website at the beginning, we said we were not a consulting company. no consulting services, no professional services capabilities or businesses. We forced ourselves to be a product company on day one. And that was actually unlike what many of the other companies in this category did. They ended up becoming services or consulting companies with a little bit of tool and product. And I had this firm belief that you can't be both. You have to pick one or the other. And we were going to be a software company, product company first, and then actually leave consulting revenue up for our partners to go off and make money on, because consulting is the easy button if you're trying to build a venture company. It's quick revenue, but it's low margin revenue. And by having that discipline, we were able to prevent ourselves from falling into a consulting company with just some cool tools trap that we see out there in the market today.
And I think the cool thing is too, that by doing that, other consulting companies will use your tool, because sometimes there's limitations, because there's a company here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area that they started out as one company. They started offering SOC and different XDR services, but there were some other consulting companies that, hey, we can't resell your product, you're a competitor. So they had to form this other separate company to do all their consulting through and leave this other as a product company so they could sell the product. So I think it's a good idea and unique that you started out that way. So, consulting companies use this product, and it's a tool to, force multiply what the pen testers are doing, make their job easier. It's like the next evolution in pen testing. It's something that had to happen, because you think at one time we didn't have vulnerability scanners. We didn't have the Metasploit framework. Everything was manual with Nmap and some other tools out there that you had to kind of cobble things together. And people wouldn't think of doing a pen test nowadays without running a vulnerability scanner, because it's hard for one person to do all this manual testing. There's so much to test these days. Things have evolved so much. There's so much technology, you can't do it. So this only makes sense. And for the practitioners listening, I think it's an opportunity for you to be more creative and do more fun stuff when you got something else to take care of this for you. And then you can go off and focus on, web application and other, technologies.
Yeah. If we double click on that, as I was getting back into this space, I remember I'd taken a few months off between Splunk and starting at JSOC just to stay with the family and better myself professionally. And I remember wanting to go down the OSCP path just to get back into the original engineering roots that I had from when I was a kid. And I remember having to go through and learn the nuances of all of these tools, most of which were unsupported open source or barely supported open source, with all sorts of nuances and flags. And I realized the barrier of entry for becoming a certified ethical hacker was significant. That was still pretty technical. And it was quite a leap for me to go off and learn all these nuances. And then on top of that, to become a consistently great ethical hacker required 10 years or more of like hands-on operational experience in order to see the diverse environments and the different ways to get stuck as you're kind of going through that process. And then my time on the military side of the house further confirmed how difficult the barriers of entry were and how important operational experience and operational tempo were in this space. And so that's what really kind of crystallized my conviction to start a company that started as automated, but the idea was to move to autonomous pen testing. As I double click on the role of the human, and you just alluded to it, doing web application pen testing, finding logic flaws in custom code is a uniquely human problem to solve, because it's very difficult for algorithms to go off and understand logic, understand inconsistencies in logic, at least current state of the art is. And so I view the future pen testing landscape as humans are the scalpel, focus on custom code, logic flaws, 0 days in custom software, and then maybe very specific bespoke systems, or systems where you don't have access to cyber ranges to build exploit content like OT systems. Those all feel like in parts of the problem set that are very uniquely human to solve. Autonomous systems, especially that go after infrastructure pen testing, that is uniquely solved by algorithms, because at the end of the day, an infrastructure pen test is a graph analytics problem. That was my big epiphany as I started to study this space again, because it's the relationship between Active Directory, compromised credentials, misconfigured Jenkins servers, exploitable VMware servers, misconfigured IAM rules in the cloud. It's how all of these different security weaknesses are interconnected that will allow an attacker to achieve an objective, which is become domain admin, steal sensitive data, so on and so forth. And that is a uniquely graph analytics problem. So infrastructure pen testing is best solved by algorithms, whereas web application pen testing and application pen testing specifically is best solved by humans. And I see this human machine teaming world where humans are the scalpel and algorithms are the force multiplier at scale. Does that align with the way you think about it?
Yeah, I really do. And so one of the things too, while we're kind of on the topic, because sometimes I think people in leadership roles don't understand the need for the threat actor perspective. If you could kind of explain that in business terms, or terminology that someone on the business side or senior management would understand.
Yeah. So a qualification question we ask in sales, I'll kind of start from that side first, is when we talk to a CIO or a CISO or a security leader, with an unlimited budget, how many pen tests would you run a year? And the answer is multiple choice. It's either 1 to 2 or 4 and more. That's it. And the people that check 1 to 2 pen tests a year tend to have a very compliance-centric mindset to cybersecurity. Their obsession is not to secure, defend, and operate their environment. Their obsession is to make sure that their boxes are checked so they don't get in trouble when they get breached, right? It's almost the goal is plausible deniability. For those that said they want to run 4 or more pen tests, they had the belief that for every patch Tuesday, there should be a pen test Wednesday, that their job was not to be compliant. Their job was to be ready. How do you use pen testing to improve your readiness for a real attack? Because if you're ready, you know the attacker's going to get in and you're ready to pounce and stop them from achieving their objectives. And so I think there is then this fundamental shift away from the 1 to 2 tests a year mindset, that compliance checkbox mindset that was prevalent throughout the 2000s, 2010s, and I think up until around 2020, 2021. And I've seen this flip towards this idea of proving readiness. And pen testing is the best way to prove readiness on your own terms, because the alternative is to wait for the bad guys to show up and point out that you didn't tune your EDR correctly, which is why they got code execution, dumped OS credentials, and then elevated privileges to become a domain admin. And so I think there's this shift at the executive level from being compliant to being ready. I think part of that shift is the CIOs and CISOs are being held accountable for what they didn't know in their environment, which wasn't true, say, 10 years earlier. If you didn't know about a vulnerability or an exploitable weakness, you could plausibly say, yeah, I didn't know about it. You didn't give me enough budget. And then that CIO or CISO would save their job. I no longer think that's true. I think there's an expectation at the board level, at the auditor level, at the cyber insurance level, that we expect you, board to the CIO or CISO, to be ready and successfully defend given how much money we're pouring in. And if you can't, it doesn't matter if you didn't know about it. We still expected you to do it. You're therefore going to be liable one way or the other. And so I think that's been the shift.
Yeah, one of the things too, wanted to kind of cover here too, since we kind of discussed a little bit before the call, a lot of the listeners here are folks that are either in cybersecurity or looking to move into other roles. So what would you recommend for someone these days that's wanting to move into an offensive security role?
What I found, and we saw this in hiring, and take Noah King as an example, but some of the other folks we have in the company. What I found was world-class offensive people, especially infrastructure pen testers, network pen testing, infrastructure pen testing. They were first world-class network engineers first, or world-class systems administrators first. And then they layered the offensive set of skill sets on top of that. If you were an excellent software engineer, web developer, which Noah King was, for him to make the leap to become a web app pen tester wasn't as significant because he already had a very deep and fundamental understanding of web application development. And so I feel that in offensive cyber, it doesn't matter if you're on the good guy side or the bad guy side. At the end of the day, folks that are in offensive cyber are obsessed with mastering their craft. They are the best network engineering experts in the world, the best sysadmins in the world, the best web app developer types in the world, because you need that level of foundation, I think, to understand how to break and exploit and find weaknesses in those systems. And so for me, maybe a little bit counter to some paths that folks have taken, is go off and be an expert in network engineering, systems administration, and use that as the foundation getting into offensive. I've seen it before, but I have a hard time grokking outside of just raw, pure talent that these folks have. But these folks that didn't come from that strong technical foundation and still became successful offensive folks, I feel those are unicorns that had some unique kind of super genius talent to them. That's not the norm. And so I think the more traditional route is become an expert in some of those fundamental aspects of enterprise computing, and then use that to build your offensive background. I mean, how did you do it?
Yeah, that's great advice. And one of the things, just before I get into how I did it, is the fact that now, because whenever I got into it, I'm sure pen testing existed, but you just really didn't hear about pen test. But I started out as a sysadmin, so I spent the first 6 years of my career as a system administrator. Once I became a pen tester for doing network pen testing, it was the best thing that I had done, because understanding how Windows security works, Linux or Unix security, because you really have to understand the technology before you can secure it, and then even more if you're going to be able to exploit it. Because if you get a shell or command line to a system and you don't understand the command line, you're going to be doing a lot of Googling. So one of the things I really recommend to folks when they're wanting to get in is tell them, you need sysadmin level skills, not saying you have to spend, X amount of years doing this or that. You can learn the skill and get into it. But yeah, that's kind of the way I did it. And from there, I moved into network security, application security, and then into pen testing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think those fundamental skills, you said something that kind of clicked for me, which is administer it, learn to administer it, then learn to secure it so you can learn to exploit it.
Yeah, because one of my first roles, and they really took a chance on me, and part of what helped me get the job was because I was learning on my own. I got laid off from my job of 14 years, or was about to be laid off. And I saw a pen testing role open in Verizon Consulting. So I applied for it, interviewed with the hiring manager, and that was the only interview I got. And I got the job offer, but I told him all the things I was self-taught on, because I used to do web design as a side business. And I used to host websites at home. So I had a Red Hat server running Apache web server. I was hosting the email for my customers and all that. And he saw that, and his approach was, he was never telling us, hey, take this pen testing course, learn this hacking technique. He was always encouraging us to build. And so fortunately, I interviewed with someone that had a philosophy that kind of tied into my way of learning, and I got that opportunity because I didn't have the hacking skills. I'd taken one of the Foundstone Ultimate Hacking courses and the Certified Ethical Hacking course, but really didn't have those skills. And fortunately, having that building experience in my background helped me break in to pen testing.
Amazing.
So what are your views on certifications? Because I know you've seen people that are highly skilled without certifications. You've been able to see the talent. So what are kind of your views on certifications?
It's a great question. So I kind of split certification, folks with certs, into two different buckets. I see the first bucket, which they came up with a more traditional academic background. So they've got an undergraduate degree in computer science, maybe a graduate degree in computer science. They've got years of professional experience as a sysadmin, as a software engineer, or so on. And they pursued certifications as a form of self-learning to achieve a skill that was now more industry relevant versus academic relevant. And what I've found with those folks, once again, is they tended to have a more traditional technology foundation. And then the certs were giving them kind of last mile knowledge of something you're not going to learn at school, right? In traditional school. And that cert of last mile knowledge was a blend of the cert and hands-on experience. So I always viewed those as kind of hand in hand, which was the cert was in many ways a way to prove you were a learn-it-all and a self-learner, and you had your own desire to better yourself. So it wasn't the cert, but the fact that you got one when you could have been home with your family, or you could have been out on vacation, but instead you were studying nights and weekends to take that exam. For me, the cert in that world is about your conviction to demand better of yourself. Now, the other kind are the folks that use certs in lieu of a traditional educational background. And I think that what you'll see in that group are kind of two subgroups. You find the true unicorns. These are incredibly gifted, talented technology folks that were able to skip that traditional educational background and become incredibly successful using certs in lieu of a degree. And I think that we see a lot of those folks on the speaking circuit. We celebrate them. I think there's an entire long tail of folks that pursued certs in lieu of a degree that don't have the same levels of success. And at least when I read the various cert boards that are out there, I'll read a lot about folks that though they got the certs, they're still struggling to land jobs and so on and so forth. And so I think that certs are amazing in the sense that they signal to me as a hiring manager, as a leader, that this person continues to learn and better and improve themselves. I think that certs built on top of a robust underlying technology foundation are great people to bring in. And I think those, the long tail of certs, however, there's a level of skepticism from a hiring manager standpoint. And I think a lot more scrutiny, right or wrong, on whether those folks truly have the skills to succeed in the company or not. And so I guess my answer is I've got a mixed point of view, but it's very nuanced and it's not like a uniform opinion across the board.
Yeah, I like that. It's interesting too, the types of certs people get. So, I mean, there's some certifications that's question and answer, and you can go through boot camps and stuff. One of the examples I like to share, because anyone asks me, what do you think of boot camps? I kind of discourage against boot camps. So, well, I think if you go through a boot camp, it's really up to you after the fact to continue learning to retain what you learned. Because I went through the mortgage company I worked for, we had someone on staff that was working for a training company, and they drastically cut the trainer's salary. So he decided he's going to go back and be a sysadmin. But while he was at the company, he was offering some training courses through his own business that eventually went full time. And we were fortunate enough to get access to these boot camps, to get a seat in it. Either the company would, if starting out, as many people the company wanted to put in there were in there and so forth. But I got lucky enough to go through the MCSE boot camps and the CCNA. And I remember with the MCSE stuff, I was using that stuff day to day. So I remembered it and it was helpful. Well, going through the CCNA boot camps, I could answer interview questions on Cisco stuff really well for about a month. But then once I got away from it, I wasn't actually applying it, using those skills. I totally lost it. So it was kind of, and you could kind of see when you look at those type of certifications, is look at whether it's hands-on or not. If it's practical, then people are actually learning something. Otherwise, it's a matter of memorizing answers to questions.
Yeah, and they're not cheap either. Like these things are really expensive to take. Some of these courses are. I have a kind of a more general point of view on boot camps, and one I went through this at Horizon 3, but in general, what I've seen, what I think is going to happen. So if you pursue a boot camp as a second career, one, good on you for wanting to take the risk, the personal risk of changing careers and going through a boot camp. I think the fact that you transition to a boot camp, that's what matters, not that you actually graduated from the boot camp, because that to me shows a characteristic, once again, of your desire to better yourself. And that is something that is just in your core, this desire to demand excellence of yourself. But what I found so we'd hired a bunch of folks that had only had boot camp experience on the software engineering side. And they came in and they were quite effective at a specific type of task, more kind of entry-level task, because this is their first job in software engineering. But actually they didn't have enough experience to know how to do software engineering and software design. And so I remember stumbling onto a JavaScript part that had 17,000 lines of JavaScript. And as I looked into it, it was a lot of copy and paste of the same stanzas and modules. And as I traced back, it's because the underlying developers that had just graduated bootcamp did not really understand object-oriented program, software design principles, so on and so forth. And there was actually a ton of rework we had to go through. And so, I think the other interesting thing that happened around the same time is the role of these co-pilots that started coming out for software engineering. And I think there's a lot of pressure on bootcamp grads now to where their primary competitors are co-pilot tools. Because if I'm going to go off and use Microsoft Copilot as a software engineering, intern, or if you will, that's complementing my senior software engineers, or the new Git tools or the new Replique tools that are coming out. They write really, really good code. And I think that these tools are going to put a lot of pressure on bootcamp grads to sink or swim, at least on the software engineering side. And those that are able to swim, once again, are the few percentage of that population that are insanely naturally gifted and talented. And they're able to move up the value chain and learn how to leverage these co-pilots as unlimited interns for themselves and crank out code. I think there's going to be a large group of bootcamp folks that struggle in that new world, and they'll have spent a lot of time and money on a bootcamp experience that is going to make it difficult for them to be employed at the salary that they hope for. And that's what I'm seeing in software engineering. I think the same thing is going to happen in pen testing, in infrastructure administration, as more of these specialty co-pilots come out. We're already seeing that in the legal industry. More of these Gen AI type co-pilots come to the market, and it's much easier for them to come out solving technical problems because of the formulaic aspect of how you solve these technical problems. I think we're going to see a negative impact on the bootcamp type grads that are unable to out execute and outperform what these co-pilots bring to the table.
Yeah, I think along the lines of co-pilots, I learned of a tool earlier this year. This company was developing like a blue team co-pilot to help security professionals. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, if you think about venture capital and just startups in general, there's this trend to focus on startups that are targeting labor. So if you look at Horizon 3, my primary competitors are in the pen testing product line. The primary competitors are basically mediocre consultants. And we have quite a win rate. We see quite a large adoption and so on. If you think about the bastions of labor-intensive dollars in cybersecurity, pro-serve consulting type expenditure, pen testing, DFIR, threat hunting, level 1, level 2 SOC analysts, these are all very labor-intensive, consulting-intensive. And I think that co-pilots that are being funded today are very much going after those 4 or 5 pockets of dollars, because while security budgets are growing, they're not growing that fast. And so in order to sell a product, you've got to displace something. And it's easier to displace consultants than it is to displace the incumbent SIM, Splunk or Curator or whatever else. And so I think that the 50% of the cybersecurity, budget or spend in the market is labor intensive. And I think a lot of these startups are going after those pockets of labor, which putting that much more pressure on those with certifications and bootcamp experiences and so on.
Yeah, one of the things I think that, at least with, autonomous pen testing and some of the other technologies out there, I think one of the things that's helping prevent is, I think, in my opinion, I think is help prevent some offshoring of jobs, because you've seen a lot of pen testing companies offshoring to other countries to get cheaper labor to continue. So when you have a way to do autonomous pen testing or other ways to streamline and automate other security functions and co-pilots, then you kind of reduce that need to offshore your labor.
Yeah, I think I don't believe you can do this in threat hunting or DFIR just because the stakes are so much higher. But what I found in pen testing, once again, when I was a CIO, I saw this, my time at Splunk, I saw this, and elsewhere, it was very easy for these consulting firms, because there was such a big shortage of talent, certified pen testing talent, they sacrificed quality for profit. And so they were able to just put bodies with very basic qualifications that were effectively doing Nmap scans or OpenVAS scans with a little bit of poking and prodding, and then wrapping that in a very pretty PDF or PowerPoint. And so the quality of pen test results varied widely. I remember looking at, as an experience, I had experiment multiple pen testing groups go after the same scope, and the findings were widely different between them. And it was because some were able to use poorly qualified offshore labor, poorly qualified onshore labor. The shore didn't matter in terms of quality. I think because the prices were basically the same, the shoring, I think, just affected the profit margins of that particular engagement. And so the wide range of quality was super frustrating for me as the recipient of pen test results. And I think what autonomous pen testing brings to the table is a level of consistency and coverage. So we had a customer run a pen test against 97,000 hosts. And we very thoroughly and exhaustively found, I think, 32 different ways to become domain admin. We gained access to almost 700 critical data stores, databases, file shares, so on and so forth. We were able to find credentials in a key store file on a shared drive, tucked away in some obscure part of the network, pull it out and reuse it to compromise the cloud environment. And so autonomous pen testing allows you to go both wide and deep and maximize coverage and exhaustively assess an environment. That should have cost that customer $1 million in consulting fees and maybe 6 to 12 months worth of work or more to cover 97,000 hosts. And so I think that not only does autonomous pen testing bring you consistency in quality and execution, but also comprehensiveness in terms of scope and coverage. And that's why I continue to say in that particular product line, or that capability, autonomous pen testing, the primary competitors are these mediocre consultants that were basically gift wrapping OpenVAS and Nmap and claiming it was a thorough result. And those are the people we've been putting out of business and wiping off the map.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring that up because I knew someone that worked for a while consulting for a company, and that's basically what they ran a Nessa scan, put it in a pen test report template. And he was actually going through trying to exploit things, but their basic standard way of doing business was just run a scan, put it in a pen test report.
Exactly. And then it does everyone a disservice. It gives the end customer of that consulting firm a false sense of security. They will end up in the news because they don't know where they're exploitable. It does a disservice to the individual you talk about because they're not upping their skills. They've got reputational risk of an employer with those kinds of practices. And so that was kind of the pain I felt that I wanted to go after. And that became the first thing I targeted. And now that is not to say you've got other firms. I mean, if you look at some of the more higher end boutique consulting firms, look at what Dragos does in OT. Look what TrustedSec does, or what they did in kind of the middle of America with their customers. Incredibly talented pen testers, demand for excellence and quality in their results. They charge a premium for it, and good on them because they're the ones doing the right thing. The lack of talent at scale inhibits how much they can go off and do. But I love to find ways to put those kinds of companies on a pedestal because they're true experts that care deeply about their craft. And I love putting out of business the faux companies that are just doing glorified Nessa scans.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's the sad thing about offensive security is the understanding of it. So it's too easily for people to be taken advantage of sometimes because they either haven't worked in that space or just don't understand that space very well. And then down to budget, people, sometimes there's some things you get a bargain on, and but some things you just have to kind of, request quality over just the price.
Yep. I think though that there is a shift coming that is going to put a lot of pressure on pen testing companies, regardless of how good they are, which is I've always viewed pen test results as this map and compass for how to improve your defenses. And we've all kind of, even the higher end firms I would engage with when I was on the CIO side of the table or the customer side of the table, you would use your pen test results and use that to figure out what password policy problems you have to fix, where your EDR is not doing their job, and so on and so forth. Well, I think that there's this shift to offense driving defense. So how do I use my pen test results to actually drive defensive workflows? And so the first workflow we brought together was while running a pen test, if we get code execution on a host or gain access to a file share, we will leave behind honey tokens so that if a real threat actor comes in after us, they're going to stumble onto those honey tokens and set off all sorts of alerts and alarms. This whole idea of pen testing and threat detection at the same time, which had never been done before. Because the hardest part of deception and honey tokens was not the tokens themselves. Like those are actually not very hard to build. It's where to put them in the environment that yields the highest likelihood of catching a bad guy, where you've got the highest signal to noise ratio. And what better way to figure out where to put these tokens than to use the pen test results where we already successfully exploited you. So auto deploying honey tokens based on pen test results was the first workflow we went after from Horizon 3. You can take that a step forward, which is, hey, if we got code execution on a box, we should be able to search for indicators of compromise on that box. And now we're doing pen testing and threat hunting at the same time, so on and so forth. So I view that the shift that we're driving is using offense to drive improvements in defense. And I think that's going to be the next wave of improving your security posture over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think it's such a great idea because, you've conducted this pen test. People aren't able to remediate right away, but what better to have these honey tokens sitting there to trip off any alerts whenever, a malicious actor is trying to take advantage of that vulnerability. And another
exactly.
interesting comment I heard at a keynote earlier this year, the person presenting was talking about any environment that they'd pen tested in that was using deception technology that they got caught every time. So, and this is like a really well-known industry expert that's created some tools and stuff that this happened to. So that's even more encouragement that what you're doing is the right thing.
Yeah. And I think that, whenever you hear me talk about startups and companies, I feel there are 4 elements to building an iconic company. The first element is your product advantage. And what you need to have is a product experience that's so emotionally connective with your end user that they need a cigarette at the end of using your product. That was at least what Godfrey Sullivan used to tell us at Splunk. And it should be that well-defined an aha moment that they experience when they use your product. That frictionless, that amazing, that compelling. And that time to value kind of product advantage is paramount. The next thing you want to have is a distribution advantage. You want to enable partners, channel partners, consulting firms, and so on to make money off of you as a company and as a product, because you can't do everything yourself. And these consulting firms, these resellers have invested decades of last mile trusted relationships with their customer base. And so you want to embrace them and integrate them as part of your company. So being a distribution advantage. The third area is a community advantage. And this is something that you and I know have talked quite a bit about, which is if you are technically authentic and can empathize with the end user because you've held their jobs, you should be able to cultivate radical champions that love your product, love your brand, and are willing to get Horizon 3 tattoos. In fact, I literally saw a person with a Splunk tattoo when I was a CTO because Splunk, I think, wrote the book on how to cultivate radical champions. So that community advantage becomes the third out of 4. And the final one is data advantage. In the world of AI, if you're not a data company, you're not going to survive. And if you look at between open AIs like, the 4.0 model, Llama, so on and so forth, all of these models are all kind of ending in the same spot in terms of effectiveness. And the big reason, it doesn't matter how many GPUs they buy, how much they train, they're all kind of ending up in the same kind of plus or minus percentage points of effectiveness of their particular tools. And the big reason why is they're all training on the same data that's out there, publicly available data off the web. And so the X factor is not the weights and models of these AI systems. It's the training data. And if you only have access to public training data, you're only going to be so differentiating, which is why from the very beginning, I viewed Horizon 3 as a data company. Every time we run a pen test, we're getting anonymized telemetry of offensive cyber operations that no one else has access to. And that is adding to my corpus of proprietary private training data used to improve our algorithms in development. And so I think the next wave of AI companies are going to be companies that thought of that data advantage from day one, built that moat of training data, and now are able to build high value autonomous agents on top of it. We saw Salesforce make a bunch of announcements. I actually think the benefit in that world lies with the large incumbents because they're the ones with access to the largest pot of private training data, unless like us, you started collecting that training data along the way. And we collect, I think, 1.5 billion unique attack training data events a month. That's more than anyone else in the industry. And I think we'll run more pen tests this year. Average scope 2,000 hosts, like decent sized tests, largest in the hundreds of thousands of hosts, maybe 1 million hosts at some point this year. We'll run more pen tests this year than the entire history of computing. Every one of those pen tests is collecting proprietary anonymized telemetry that's used in our private data sets.
Yeah, it's just amazing to see that, because you think of individual pen testers learning this technology, learning from this experiences, and then also too from a perspective of a human perspective. When these people gain that, they move on. Maybe hopefully you're lucky that they documented some of the things that they learned. Not all cases they do, but just, how many pen tests has Horizon 3 conducted so far?
I think this year we're going to run somewhere between 70,000 and 100,000 pen tests.
And that's just for this year.
That's just this year. And then we're generally growing our pen test count 3x year over year. So next year we'll be somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 pen tests.
Yeah, and you just think of all that learning from all those pen tests to improve upon node 0. So how long does it take for domain compromise now?
So if you ignore the single shot CVEs like zero logon or something like that, take those away. And if you use the conditions of it had a domain compromise required at least 3 different hosts, at least 3 different weaknesses, starting with 0 privileges or credentials, I believe the fastest we've achieved now is 4 minutes and 12 seconds. The previous year was 7 minutes and 19 seconds. So year over year, we cut it in half. Now, we are not optimized to get that as fast as possible. In fact, we're a breadth first algorithm. So we try to go as wide as we can and recon everything and then methodically go deeper. Even with that breadth first approach, it took 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Had we gone depth first, which is hit domain compromise as quickly as possible, I'm confident it would be sub 60 seconds. And then think of yourself as a defender. In 60 seconds or less, can you detect the alerts, characterize them, and do something about it before you get locked out of your system? And the answer is probably not, which is why I have high conviction that the future of cybersecurity is autonomous. It's algorithms fighting algorithms with humans by exception. And we've really pioneered the offensive side of that equation.
Very cool. So thanks for taking the time to join me today. This has been a great conversation and enjoy learning more about you. Is there anything you'd like to share before we close out the episode?
No, I think that the community, not just the offensive community, but the security community in general, is paramount to our success. I think one of the things I wish we did a better job of was integrating the offensive and defensive communities into one cohesive security community. And I think that the better we can cross those divides, and the better we all are as a community. And so hopefully we continue to see more integration between red and blue versus adversarial relationships between red and blue.
Yeah, I like that. Definitely work better together as a team than separate units. So thanks again for taking time to be on the show.
Awesome. Thank you, Phil.
Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to The Philip Wiley Show. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. In the meantime, to learn more about Philip, go to thehackermaker.com and connect with him on LinkedIn and Twitter @Philip Wiley. Until next time.